The Epstein files didn't explode into public view the way movies depict scandals. There was no single dramatic leak, no anonymous USB drive slid across a table in a dark bar, no midnight press conference. Instead, they arrived the way uncomfortable truths usually do in real life. Quietly, bureaucratically, stamped with court seals and released under language so dry it almost seemed designed to lull the public into ignoring what was inside. But once people started reading, really reading, the temperature changed fast. Because buried inside those documents was not a smoking gun, not a single revelation that neatly tied everything together, but something far more disturbing: a pattern, a network, and a reminder that power, when insulated long enough, begins to believe it is untouchable. These recent releases, largely stemming from the unsealing of documents connected to the long-running civil case involving Jeffrey Epstein's associate Ghislaine Maxwell, are not new allegations in the sense that they suddenly invent crimes. What they do instead is something arguably more dangerous. They pull back the curtain on how many powerful people orbited Epstein, how casually they moved in and out of his world, and how normalized proximity to him became long after rumors of abuse were already circulating. The files include deposition transcripts, emails, flight logs, and references made under oath. And while many of the names mentioned have not been accused of wrongdoing, the sheer density of influential figures forces an uncomfortable question. How did so many people pass through the same orbit without noticing or claiming to notice? What was happening at the center? To understand why these files matter, you have to rewind. Epstein was not just a wealthy financier. He was a social broker. He connected politicians to billionaires, academics to donors, royalty to celebrities. His homes were not just residences, they were crossroads, and according to multiple survivor testimonies, they were also hunting grounds. For years, rumors circulated, deals were made behind closed doors, and consequences were delayed. Epstein's 2008 non-prosecution agreement in Florida already told the public something was wrong with the system. A man accused of abusing dozens of underage girls served barely any jail time. That should have been the end of his access to power. Instead, it became a pause. The newly released documents don't suddenly prove guilt for every name mentioned, and pretending otherwise would be irresponsible. But they do reveal how often Epstein's name surfaced in serious conversations among people who claimed ignorance later. They show how frequently flights were taken, meetings were arranged, favors were exchanged. They show that Epstein wasn't operating on the fringes. He was embedded, and that matters because systems protect what they integrate. One of the most jarring aspects of the files is how normalized everything appears on paper. Emails read like routine scheduling notes. Depositions reference visits and introductions in tones devoid of alarm. This is not what people expect when they imagine criminal proximity. They expect secrecy, coded language, obvious red flags. Instead, what they find is banal familiarity. And that's the point. Epstein didn't need to hide in shadows. He operated in plain sight, wrapped in prestige, philanthropy, and money. The documents don't just expose him. They expose a culture that equates wealth with credibility and access with innocence. The public reaction has been predictable and yet revealing. Social media erupted with name lists stripped of context, accusations hurled without evidence, defenses issued just as reflexively. This is where the story becomes dangerous, because outrage without precision becomes noise, and noise is the perfect hiding place for truth. Some names appear because they were mentioned by someone else. Some appear because they crossed paths once. Some appear because they were legitimately involved in legal or academic work. Lumping them together flattens the story and gives bad actors cover. The real question isn't who was named. It's why Epstein's ecosystem existed at all, and why it endured. The files also reignited scrutiny of institutions that failed repeatedly, prosecutors who declined to pursue cases, media organizations that sat on stories, financial systems that enabled Epstein's wealth despite opaque origins, and perhaps most disturbingly, a culture that treated victims as inconvenient details rather than central figures. The survivors' testimonies, scattered throughout years of legal proceedings, are the emotional core of this story. They describe patterns of recruitment, grooming, coercion, and silence that didn't require a massive conspiracy. It required indifference. What makes these releases particularly potent now is timing. Trust in institutions is already eroded. People are primed to believe the system protects the powerful because history keeps proving it does. So when documents surface that seem to confirm long-held suspicions, the reaction isn't shock, it's validation. And that validation fuels a hunger for accountability that the legal system has so far struggled to satisfy. But accountability is complicated. Epstein is dead. Maxwell has been convicted, but many see her as a gatekeeper, not the apex. Civil cases continue, but they move slowly and quietly. Criminal investigations into others have not materialized in the way the public expects. This gap between expectation and reality creates a vacuum, and vacuums get filled with speculation. The danger is not that people ask questions. The danger is that the loudest answers are often the least accurate. So what do these files actually change? On paper, not as much as people want. They don't reopen cases automatically. They don't trigger arrests by themselves. Courts release documents, prosecutors decide what to do with them. But culturally, they do something else. They remove plausible deniability. They make it harder for institutions to pretend ignorance. They give journalists, activists, and victims a documented foundation to demand further inquiry. And they remind the public that justice delayed is not justice denied only if the delay eventually ends. This is where the story sharpens, because the Epstein saga isn't really about sex crimes alone. It's about how power clusters, how it protects itself, and how consequences are distributed unevenly. Epstein wasn't powerful because he was invisible. He was powerful because he was useful, and usefulness is the currency that buys silence. As more people read the documents closely, not just the headlines, a pattern emerges that's impossible to unsee. Epstein didn't exploit a loophole. He exploited a mindset. The belief that certain people are too important to question, that access is a privilege worth protecting. That discomfort is the price of ambition. That mindset is older than Epstein, and it will outlive him unless it's confronted directly. And this is where the real tension sits, because confronting it means asking questions no institution likes to answer. Who knew what and when? Why were warnings ignored? Why did it take victims decades to be heard? Why does transparency arrive only after irreversible damage has been done? These are not rhetorical questions. They are demands. And the files, for all their limitations, give those demands weight. The story doesn't end with a list of names. It begins with a reckoning over how easily a system can be bent when enough powerful people benefit from looking away. And that reckoning is still unfinished. What makes the Epstein files so corrosive isn't that they reveal something entirely new. It's that they force a confrontation with something people already suspected, but were trained not to say out loud. That elite spaces operate on a different moral gravity. That accountability weakens as status rises. And that proximity to power can act like insulation, muffling screams until they sound like background noise. Once the documents were unsealed and absorbed into the bloodstream of public discourse, the conversation shifted. The question was no longer whether Epstein was protected. That argument was settled years ago. The question became whether the system that enabled him was ever going to face itself honestly, or whether it would simply absorb the shock, rebrand, and move on like it always has. The files show a world where introductions mattered more than warnings, where reputation laundering was subtle and constant. Epstein wasn't just hosting parties. He was hosting legitimacy. By surrounding himself with respected figures, institutions, and causes, he created a buffer that made accusations seem implausible by comparison. This is how predators survive at the top, not through secrecy alone, but through credibility by association. When respected names appear in your contacts, your calendar, your guest lists, people hesitate. Doubt becomes awkward, silence becomes polite, and silence, over time, becomes policy. One of the most uncomfortable realities the files underline is that abuse didn't happen in isolation from power. It happened because of it. The logistics required to traffic minors across borders, to silence complaints, to negotiate legal outcomes, don't exist without cooperation or neglect at multiple levels. Not necessarily coordination, but complicity through indifference. Systems don't need to conspire to fail. They just need to prioritize themselves. This is where the legal reality crashes headfirst into public expectation. People want arrests. They want trials. They want names followed by consequences. But the law doesn't work on outrage timelines. Documents alone don't equal indictments. Much of what's in the files is testimony, references, or secondhand accounts. Prosecutors need evidence that meets specific thresholds, and decades-old crimes are notoriously difficult to prosecute. Witnesses age, memories blur, jurisdictions complicate everything. That legal friction creates anger, and anger looks for targets. Some public figures named or referenced in the files moved quickly to deny wrongdoing, emphasizing that appearing in a document does not mean being accused of a crime. Legally, they're correct. Morally, the situation is murkier, and that's where discomfort lives. Because even if no crime occurred in a specific interaction, the broader question lingers. What kind of environment did you tolerate? What did you ignore? What did you rationalize because the host was wealthy, connected, or useful? History shows that reputations rarely collapse from one revelation. They erode through accumulation. A pattern of proximity, a habit of silence, a refusal to ask inconvenient questions. The Epstein files don't deliver a final verdict. They deliver context, and context has a way of changing how past behavior is interpreted. Media institutions are also exposed in this moment. Several outlets had pieces of the story years before it broke fully. Editors weighed risk, lawyers flagged liability. Decisions were made. Some stories ran late. Some didn't run at all. That isn't unique to Epstein. It's how modern media often handles stories involving extreme wealth and influence. The files reignited criticism of that caution, especially from journalists who argue that protecting institutions at the expense of victims is a betrayal of the profession's purpose. Then, there's politics. Epstein's connections crossed ideological lines, which is precisely why the story resists neat partisan framing. This isn't a left story or a right story. It's a power story. Attempts to weaponize the files for political gain often collapse under scrutiny because the rot isn't concentrated in one camp. It's distributed, and that's unsettling because it denies people the comfort of moral tribalism. The international dimension complicates things further. Epstein operated across borders, exploiting legal gray zones and jurisdictional fragmentation. Accountability becomes a relay race where no one wants the baton. This diffusion of responsibility is one of the reasons outcomes feel so unsatisfying. Everyone has a reason why it's not their move. Meanwhile, survivors are left watching the spectacle unfold, knowing that their pain is often treated as secondary to the drama surrounding powerful names. Many have spoken publicly about the exhaustion of being believed only when it's politically convenient. The files for them are not shocking. They're confirmation. Validation that what they endured wasn't isolated or imagined, that it fit a pattern others now see in black and white. The psychological toll of that validation is complex. Being proven right doesn't undo harm. It doesn't restore stolen time. And it doesn't guarantee justice. But it does remove one of the cruelest layers of abuse: disbelief. So, what happens next? In practical terms, several things are already in motion. Civil litigation continues, with survivors seeking compensation and accountability through the only avenues still open to them. Legislators face renewed pressure to reform statutes of limitations for sex crimes, especially those involving minors. Financial institutions are under scrutiny for their past relationships with Epstein and similar figures, prompting conversations about due diligence that go beyond profit. There are also renewed calls for transparency around non-prosecution agreements and sealed settlements. Epstein's 2008 deal is now widely regarded as a case study in how legal mechanisms meant to serve justice can be weaponized to avoid it. The files add fuel to demands that such agreements be limited or eliminated in cases involving serious crimes. But perhaps the most significant outcome is cultural, not legal. The Epstein files have shifted the baseline of skepticism. Wealth is no longer assumed to equal virtue by default. Philanthropy is interrogated. Access is questioned. The public is more willing to believe survivors when they speak against powerful figures. That shift didn't start here, but these releases accelerate it. Still, cynicism lurks close behind. Many believe nothing meaningful will happen, that names will fade from headlines, that institutions will wait out the outrage. History gives them reasons to think that way. But resignation is also a choice, and it's one the files implicitly challenge. Because even if Epstein never faces earthly justice, the system that enabled him doesn't get to hide behind his death forever. Every document unsealed, every deposition read, every question asked chips away at the mythology of untouchability. Power hates daylight, not because it always reveals crimes, but because it removes ambiguity. And ambiguity has always been its shield. The Epstein files don't offer closure. They don't tie the story up neatly. What they do instead is force a reckoning with an uncomfortable truth. That exploitation on this scale doesn't require monsters in basements. It requires normal people in high places choosing convenience over conscience, again and again, until the damage becomes invisible to everyone except those living it. The real outcome of these releases won't be measured in arrests alone. It will be measured in whether society learns to stop confusing status with safety, generosity with goodness, and silence with innocence. Because the most dangerous lesson to take from the Epstein story isn't that evil hides in shadows. It's that sometimes it lives right in the open, daring you to look away. And for the first time in a long time, the documents are making that harder to do. The Epstein files as more than a scandal and frames them as a full exposure of how power protects itself. It traces how Epstein was able to operate for years, not through secrecy alone, but through proximity to wealth, politics, media, and institutions that benefited from looking the other way. The story shows how his network functioned less like a conspiracy and more like a system of indifference, where reputation, influence, and legal loopholes insulated abuse from consequences. It explains what the newly released files actually contain, why their contents are legally explosive but procedurally slow to translate into prosecutions, and how public figures, financial institutions, and media organizations are affected. The script highlights the frustration between public outrage and legal reality, while centering the experience of survivors who see the documents not as revelations, but as long overdue validation. The conclusion argues that the real impact of the Epstein files will not be defined solely by arrests or court rulings, but by a cultural shift in how society views power, accountability, and credibility. Rather than offering closure, the files strip away ambiguity and force uncomfortable questions about who was protected, who stayed silent, and why systems consistently fail the vulnerable. The story ends by making it clear that Epstein was not an anomaly, but a symptom, and that the true reckoning lies in whether society refuses to look away the next time power demands silence.